Well, hello there, and welcome back to another edition of Show Your Work. We're going to pick up where we left off with flexures are awesome? Asterisk, question mark, exclamation point, all the above. Today is going to be all about one design architecture, and unlike how it was cool, this is going to be more of a deep dive into how I made mistakes and how I wish I approached this differently. So I have a bunch of different prints on the table. And this design had two flexures that were kind of curved up, and they were designed to apply upward Z-force, so up towards the computer. Because you would take this, again, 3D printed AirTag, drop it in place, and then push and twist the receiver on top of it. There's a carve out in the receiver as well to reduce as much space as possible. And the way that would work, let's show on this 150% scale model. If you look at the inside, so you drop the receiver tab down here, so kind of a tab like this. You drop the receiver in, and as you get here, you're starting to apply some spring force by trying to overcome this flexure. You slide it down under this ramp, and then it clicks into place. You keep sliding it, and it's locked. I think that must have been sized for pretty close to the tab. When you're removing your head unit from the mount, you'd be rotating it counterclockwise, and this stop would prevent you from removing the entire receiver. It would just let you remove the computer. There's a couple things that I ran into. So for Wahoo, that would be okay because Wahoos actually have a hard stop, so you can't remove the computer clockwise. You have to remove it counterclockwise. But Garmin doesn't. So Garmin, you can remove it by rotating it clockwise or counterclockwise. And then you have Hammerhead, which also lets you do it either clockwise or counterclockwise. For Hammerhead, it's clockwise or counterclockwise plus an axial translation. But at this point, I wasn't designing around Hammerhead. So these flexures, we're going to apply upward force so that the locking system would be utilized. And at the time, I was designing this to be fully molded because if it was molded, core it out and everything, if it was molded, that would give me a bunch of benefits. For one thing, you wouldn't need shims for using the default size on your handlebars because this would be a glass fill nylon, probably a plastic, and it wouldn't scratch your bars. You would still need collars to step it down to other sizes, but at least one of the sizes wouldn't need shims. That would mean less waste, that would mean less tooling. It would be a cleaner product overall. And if this had been aluminum, which it ended up being, you need the shims so that you don't scratch bars. Or in my opinion, you need the shim so that you don't scratch bars. The other benefit would be it'd be quite light because glass fiber nylon is quite light, and the CapEx, like the tooling, would be quite expensive, but the per part cost would be a lot lower than a ton of custom machining, which is what I ended up doing. I feel confident that where I ended up is a really good solution, but at the time I was trying to do everything molded because I really like designing molded stuff. So I thought I could totally make this work because, two flexures, a lot of force, glass fill nylon, quite stiff. And there's a couple core issues with this. One of the first ones is that, as I alluded to last time, plastics creep under steady load. And given this design where the flexure is not at the most load when it's in the resting state, but it's pretty high load because, as you drop the receiver in, there's no load experienced by the flexure as you put it down. If the receiver is just resting on it, there's just the weight of the receiver and computer. And then the peak load is at the bottom of this ramp because that's when the flexure is most compressed. And then it snaps into place. But you need a bunch of load still applied because otherwise, every time you push a button on the computer, the entire thing will feel floppy and sloppy and loose. So the quality of your experience using your head unit is directly proportional to how stiff this flexure is. Then if that flexure has a ton of load on it, you're putting the plastic in a condition where it really wants to creep over time, and then the force goes down, and there could be a window where it creeps and it's still acceptable, but then you're also trying to overcome the force to remove the receiver, and it's directly coupled. I included a clip of a video in the last Show Your Work where I'm pushing buttons on a computer on a force gauge. And that was to quantify, well, how much force are you actually putting into this computer on a regular basis? So when you push on it, what is the force experienced? And try to use that to say, well, how stiff does the flexure need to be so it doesn't feel sloppy? And then you make that force pretty high and you realize that with a long moment arm, like an out front mount, if you apply a bunch of force, like it's very possible to make this thing slip. So there's these competing things, and like, yes, there's not directly the same because clearly you can use a computer on an out front mount and it doesn't slip around your bars. But if you're trying to make everything rely on this one spring, that spring has to meet a bunch of criteria, which in general makes it harder to succeed in any one given design. So plastic, risk of creep, also putting this flexure as a critical part of the tactile experience wasn't awesome. And instead of very quickly realizing that and changing directions, I just hammered at this over and over, but I hammered at the wrong stuff. Some of the stuff I did was in service of this in terms of doing a bunch of calculations around how could the flexure be shaped to get the right force. I made this whole little web app calculator that would let you plot 2 points with different forces and travels, and then based on your plastic properties and other constraints, give you the range of flexure dimensions that would achieve that. It's actually kind of cool, and I should probably revisit it because you can do a lot of that in a spreadsheet, but to have these 2 points in a line and implicitly saying you don't care about how you travel between those points on this graph, which is not always true, it's kind of interesting to be like, oh, you can make a solver, which is basically treating the flexure as a spring, which it is, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And it was a useful tool, but also the wrong tool to build. A lot of these prototypes, I was just hammering on industrial design. I was just working on these tiny little surface tweaks. I spent a fair amount of effort working on the coring pattern. I actually don't know the variation between these different models, but I labeled them, right? So, I cranked through, we have a 47 here, right? I doubt that's the last one I made. And I don't know what I was doing with these. I don't know what was different from 47 after 46 or any of the other ones. I'm sure at the time I had a point of view, but it was just the wrong problem to be solving, right? It was the wrong problem to be solving. Oh, how do these tiny little details work? And not, how does the core architecture work? How do I know if this design is viable? These jigs were to test how different spring force created by a flexure would feel when you're using a computer. So I would mount an actual computer into here, I think I made like some sort of combination adapter that would let me use an actual sourced receiver with a computer and then feel, oh, hey, does this feel stiff enough? 25 newtons or 50 newtons or 75 newtons. And these were all designed these to have this adjustable, I think it was threaded. Yeah, it's threaded. So there's a big spring in here that I would crank down to preload and then measure the force and then use that as a representation of what this could feel like with a certain flexure. It's a cool way of prototyping it. And I guess this one was actually kind of helpful towards saying like, if it can't feel good, even if these high forces, then you don't have a design. I don't know what conclusion I drew from these, but these were cool little prototypes to make, and I want to do more things like this, sort of isolated tests. I have another story about plastic flexures, which will be the next video I make. Unfortunately, the flexures are awesome. Sad face starts to become truer and truer with the next video. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I've been having a lot of fun making these videos.